Welcome to this week. I hope you are doing well. So, we have done a lot of work up to now. We've done a lot of working with your content. You've done your annotated bibliography. You've done a lot of research. So, now it's time to write that first draft. First draft is going to be interesting for you because it might be difficult. It might be easy depending on how ready you are to delve into and dive into the research that you've done and create that first draft. First draft, remember, does not need to be perfect. This is just a draft. Your first draft can be something that you write and completely discard. But the first draft needs to be written so you can write a second and a third draft and have a final product. So let's just talk about that. When you are beginning your first draft, there's a couple stages. I'm going to have three of them here: beginning, middle, and end. And they don't really mean just the beginning of your paper, the middle of your paper, the end of your paper. These are what I am suggesting you do as you are getting ready to create that first draft. So as you are beginning, I suggest you start with the outline. You worked on an outline a few weeks ago. So take a look at that outline. Look at where you are feeling the content was going from there. Did you see any places where it needed to change based on the research you have done and the annotated bibliography you have created? Do you have a good idea of what the beginning of the paper is going to look like, the middle of the paper is going to look like, the end of the paper is going to look like? If you do, then take a look at that outline. Flesh it out a little bit. Start putting in the content where you're going to drop it. I'm going to use this source in this part. I'm going to use this source in this part. I'm going to talk about this and then use this source to prove it. So start with that outline and then make sure you have all your materials collected. You should have a big pile of materials by now, either on your computer or next to your computer. I personally like to work with physical notes and physical books and printouts of articles. So I have everything. Generally, when I'm writing a research paper, I've got things printed out so I can physically hold it, move it around, read it, and then I like to type out my content. I don't like to copy and paste from an article because I get a feel for the wording when I'm typing it out. So you got to make sure you have all your materials collected. You have to be ready to begin your writing. So look at all the notes you've collected, the journal if you're keeping one with your research, and the articles, the highlighting you've done in there, all the paperwork that you've done. And then look at that thesis one more time. See if it needs to be revised or tightened up. Your thesis, as I suggest, should not begin with "this paper will be about" or "I will be proving that." Just go ahead and state what you're proving. So make sure you're revising that thesis, getting everything ready. So obviously, after you do the beginning, you come to the middle. These are a couple of suggestions that I think you could do when you're coming to the middle of your beginning to write your paper. Go ahead and write that first paragraph. Write the introduction. Make sure the thesis is in there. You should have one paragraph as your introduction paragraph. The thesis should be contained in there. You write that first paragraph and you have a good framework of what the rest of your paper is going to look like. And then turn around and I suggest you can write the conclusion. The conclusion should show how you have proven all of the pieces of the material that you are writing. Take a look at your outline that you've done, the fleshed out part of that, and just write the conclusion based on what the first paragraph looks like, because the conclusion should be similar to your introduction, except it should show, instead of "I will," in theory saying "I will be proving this," Your conclusions say, I have proven this by doing this. You don't want to use those words. You don't want to say, I will prove or I have proven. But you want to show how the content has been proven in your conclusion. And you set that up with your introduction. And so I suggest you write those too, because that'll give you the good bookmarks. I mean, the bookends of where to go. So if you write your thesis, a good strong thesis, you write a good strong first paragraph that really folds into the rest of the paper. And then writing a conclusion helps to make sure that you are always on track. So keep those two in mind as you're working. And then you move on to the end of writing your first draft, the end of the beginning of writing your first draft. So with the end, this is going to be the largest part. This is going to be the part that takes you the longest time to do. It's going to be filling in the middle. And I know it's kind of odd having fill in the middle in the end part, but you've already, in the middle stages of writing, you have the beginning and the end. So now you got to fill in the middle. This is the part where you drop in your research. You drop in the things that you are wanting to talk about, your arguments. And this is going to take you the longest. What you might want to do is start out, I know this paper is going to be longer than this, but start out with a 5-paragraph model. You have the intro, the 3 body paragraphs, and the conclusion paragraph. So if you write a short paragraph concerning each one of those points from your thesis, then you can just build more and more onto that. So fill in the middle, take the research, add it, prove it, show that your research is there for a reason. And as I said, this is going to be the largest part, the longest part. This is going to take you the longest time, but it's going to be the most rewarding because you're going to put all the pieces together from the work that you've been doing for the past few weeks and really have a strong paper based on everything you've done. So as you're putting that paper together, you're putting the finishing touches on your first draft. Make sure you have this necessary structure of your paper. That means that you're going to want to have transitional phrases. Transitional phrases, I believe that we talked about this, where a transitional phrase will go from the end of one paragraph into the beginning of another. You should not introduce a new piece of information on a new paragraph without first introducing that you're going to introduce that into the next paragraph. Make sure that your transitional phrases are smooth, and every paragraph should have a transitional phrase. I'm going to skip down a little bit here to headers. Headers are not a substitution for a transitional phrase. You can have headers within your paper. These are little, I guess they look like chapter headings for each section of your paper, and they can be used, but make sure that you are introducing and transitioning into the use of these headers. Each paragraph will have a mini thesis telling what the paragraph is going to be about, and a mini conclusion showing what the paragraph was about. And these mini theses, and mini conclusions can be where the transitional phrases are. Then you want to have the connecting material. This is where you have all of the sentences in between the mini thesis and the mini conclusion. And this is how you use your sources. This is where you put the information from your research in. So the connecting material that is basically proving your main thesis of your paper and heading toward the main conclusion of your paper. So concerning sources, there is a lot of reading this week concerning how to integrate sources, and I'm not going to go into it deep, but there's one thing that I will say is going to definitely help you with adding sources, integrating them into your paper. You should introduce your sources every single time, and you should outroduce, which is not really a word, but I'm making it up here. So when you introduce your source, instead of just putting a quote directly in there, what you want to do is say, here is my source. This is where I got it from, according to this person. This is why you need to pay attention to this information. This is why it's important. And you outroduce it. You say, this is how this proves my thesis, or this is how this proves that point. I suggest that you should not have a source or a quote as the last sentence in a paragraph, because that's just kind of like tacking it on there. And a source should be bookend, I believe, by content that you have written on either side, where you have introduced it and you have outroduced it. So when you're doing that, it really makes for a cohesive use of your sources, cohesive paper. Now, that's just one little way to do it. There are many other ways, and the many ways are outlined in the readings from this week. So please make sure that you read all those different sections, because it will definitely help you to integrate your sources. We could talk for hours about integrating your sources, and I don't want to repeat what you're going to be reading later on this week. So as you have done all this writing and you are planning your sources, you need to make sure that you have organized all of your material. Make sure that you have used all of your content. Make sure you have all of your content. If you're missing an article, don't try to remember a source or paraphrase something. You need to make sure that you find it. You want to make the connections with the sources. That's what I mentioned with the readings that were done. Find the corroborating evidence. That's the pieces of information from two different sources that kind of agree on this. And every time you pile on a fact onto a different source material, it's going to make it stronger. It's going to make that that piece of research or the information that you're using, it's going to be that much stronger. If you just have one source that says something, it's not going to be very strong. But if you have two or three sources that say kind of the same thing, then it's going to be really strong. And then draw out the conclusions with it. That means make sure that you have the strongest conclusions from each piece of research that you're using. You don't want to be making up materials. You don't want to look for stuff that's not there. You don't want to cherry pick sources and citations. That means you don't want to just go in and say, oh, this one sentence works for me, as long as I don't talk about everything that's around it. You should never cherry pick a source. It can seem kind of like cheating, and it's dishonest. There's always what's the word? There's always material around it that shows the context of it. So don't cherry pick. We talked about the complete stages of writing last week and how you do the revise and the editing and all that stuff. So let's just go through this one more time. And the first thing that I suggest that you do is get the first draft done. Just write it. See if you can write it in one sitting or two sittings. Write it as quickly as you can. Don't be sloppy with your writing, but just get the writing done. Get that first draft done, then take a break. And once you've taken a break, you come back, look at it, then you edit it, and then you rewrite it, and you revise it. And then you read it, then you have your draft is done. And then you repeat this step for as many times as necessary so you can have a complete draft, a complete um, a complete paper. Now, because this is a first draft, it does not need to be perfect, but you should make sure it's copy edited. I don't want to see a lot of um, fragmented sentences. I don't want to see a lot of run-on sentences. I don't want to see misspellings. I don't want to see um, incomplete thoughts. I don't want to see, I will add this research later. I don't want to see that. This is a draft. This is a complete paper. This is something you're turning in for a grade. This is not just something that you're writing. A first draft is not a rough draft. A rough draft is what you do before you complete your first draft. I should also not see a paper that has marks on it, or if you have somebody edit it for you, there should not be editing notes on there. I need a clean draft. So a first draft will look like a completed paper, but it's not going to be completed because we're going to have some time to work with the material and do some revising as we work along.